welcome everyone to the inaugural webinar of a series called Unlocking the Bioeconomy for Non-Timber Forest Products. I'm Jim Chamberlain. I'm your host for the series. The series is being organized by the IUFRO task force of the same name. I'm also the co-lead of that task force and happy to say that most of the speakers in this series are members of that task force and subject matter experts. The task force was commissioned by the International Union of Forestry Research Organizations in 2019 and has more than 70 professionals from over 25 countries working together to examine issues that encourage or inhibit efforts to integrate non-timber forest products into bioeconomies. I need to give a shout out to all the enthusiastic people that have worked behind the scenes to make this series possible. Jamie Lewis, the staff historian for the Forest History Society, is making sure that the platform is functioning and that there are no glitches in the presentation. His colleagues from the Society have been supporting our efforts to bring this to you today. Our task force member in China, Jin Long at the Renmin University of China, has been working since the inception of the series concept to move the process forward. Colleagues on the science communication and web teams from the Southern Research Station, of which I'm affiliated, worked together on the design, layout, and presentation of the informational materials and the sharing of that through the social media. I want to give a true shout out to all of them. They worked as a great team. For Society of American Foresters members, to receive your CFE credits, send an email to education@foresthistory.org. You see that up on the first slide that came up, with the letter CFE in the subject line, and include your name and email address in the email body. There are going to be 12 webinars in this series, once a month, and the days and times will be announced later. Each webinar will last about 60 minutes. They will be recorded on Zoom and live streamed on the Forestry History Society YouTube site. Each will be archived on several different sites to make them more accessible to folks. The speaker will present for about 20 minutes, leaving time for questions and answers. Please use the Q&A forum, not the chat box, to ask questions. We're monitoring the Q&A forum throughout the presentation, and you can submit your questions anytime, but we'll answer them at the end. On that note, allow me to introduce our first speaker. Dr. Sven Mutke is head of service for forest industries at the Forest Research Center of the Spanish National Research Council based in Madrid. His expertise is centered on Mediterranean non-wood forest products, the management and production, particularly edible pine nuts and pine resin tapped for industrial uses. Sven is coordinating the IUFRO research group on silviculture for edible non-wood forest products and was coordinating the FAO research network on Mediterranean stone pine. Sven holds a PhD from the Forestry College of Madrid on development of stone pine as a grafted orchard crop. He has published extensively on Mediterranean pine woodlands, their ecology, management, and products. Sven has extensive experience working in multi-purpose and multi-actor research projects and networks with forest value chain stakeholders in Europe, Northern Africa, and the Middle East. And he's collaborated on projects on edible non-wood forest products in Eastern Asia and South America. With that, I'm turning it over to Sven. Welcome.
Thank you, Jim. Okay, so today I will talk on Mediterranean non-wood forest products, and as it's the first webinar of the series, I will start first with the first block about bioeconomy and non-timber forest products, and only later on switched to the Mediterranean. Bioeconomy has a lot of definitions. I will come to this. Non-timber forest products, I think we know what these are. And our task force is trying to work on this of this combination and to set up a framework for forest researchers to work on this. The webinars are part of this effort, and today we will talk about Mediterranean non-wood forest products. Okay, first of all, we should place a current context, and that's global change. Global change means there are the three parts of climate change. I think global warming has already arrived in the public awareness, at least this year, when the extreme weather events had struck extremely heavily in the global north too. So floods in Germany or Tennessee, snowstorms in January in Madrid or Texas, or heat waves seen in Canada. There were mega fires around the world in the last years. I think that's already accepted as a challenge. But the climate change is accelerated also by land use changes, by the ongoing rural flight and the trend to megacities, and the abandonment of the rural areas. And the third point is, of course, global trade and the interconnection or hyperglobalization that makes that the global shipping is increasing and the global dependence is increasing too. There was this example of disruption because that ship blocking the Suez Canal, and I think we have learned a lot of this in real life in the last months and years. One conclusion is that we must meet this 1.5 degree limit for anthropic heating, and we must try to build back better, not leaving behind anyone, and go to a zero carbon economy. And for this, of course, the sustainable development goals of the 2030 agenda might be a valuable framework. And for this, bioeconomy is one of the solutions. There are a lot of definitions of bioeconomy around, and one, I think, for simple might be this E3B concept, biological product, processes, and principles. That means it's not only of sourcing resources from biological systems, but also to use knowledge of on biological process and principles, and to develop technological applications to harness them. In the past, we have seen three different approaches to bioeconomy. Some try to reduce it to the biotech vision, to say, okay, it's only about microbiotech. So it's about microorganisms and genetic transformation and so on. So that's what we can call the Bayer-Monsanto approach of bioeconomy. I think that's quite limited. The next one was the idea to speak about biofuels, bioenergy, and to replace petrol by palm oil or by rapsoil. I think that's too limited too, and would opt for the third one. That's taking into account the ecological processes, principles, and to integrate them in economy. And one strong point there is the guarantee of sustainability, because if a system is not sustainable, it cannot work in the long run. So sustainability must be understood in the three dimensions: ecological, economic, and social. So it must imply fair trade, legality, tax obligation, due diligence along the value chains, and so on. If not, what we're talking about. The classic model, if you approach a non-wood product, would be a value chain. So it would be to look for the production, collection, trade, and down to the up to the consumption, to the end users. But actually, in the current situation, we must go to the circular bioeconomy, so not to study one product, but the matters that are applied, and to look for this reuse, redesign, recycle, and so on, avoiding waste generation and negative externalities. But of course, it's also about bioeconomy. And I've used this butterfly graphics in here, not because it's the best one, but you can find it easily. So I think it's nice for a first look. But if you have a closer look, you might wonder, okay, these flows are going up there and down there, and matters going this way around, and money, the payments are going the other way around, but something's missing. And you might wonder, okay, this is going around, but what's the source that makes them go around? What's the energy behind? And of course, that's the point. What's energy? One of the inputs is a bio-regeneration of resources by farming, hunting, and fishing, as they put it. Forestry is not mentioned yet. But what's behind, of course, is the sun energy, the inflow of sun radiation that move this mill going around. And as every system, the biosphere within the Earth system and the economy within that depends on thermodynamics, not on mechanic principles. This means that if you reflect on this butterfly graphic, we must see the second dimension, the energy flow going through there. If you forget that it might not be clear understanding what's going on. Another critic was that the bio resource cycle is of course not a separated circle cycling on, but it's integrated in the technical cycle. So it's really only one circle going round and round, driven by the solar flux. By the way, I would like to comment that bioeconomy is not the future, but it's always the present. You shouldn't forget that if you understand that agriculture and forestry is part of this bioeconomy, already a lot of economy is real economy today. Interesting enough, in 2012, when the first bioeconomy strategy of the European Union came out, they still needed to underline the relevance of growth to sustain this concept. I think we are further now. Of course, if you talk about agriculture and forestry, you should always arrest the fossil inputs of these sectors to making this balance. So, for example, there's this nice exercise for Ecuador bioeconomy that shows that if you arrest this, it's still a quite relevant part of real life economy. Okay, what economists had called externalities, confessing they had forgetting to include it in their nice models, is called today, since the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment in 2003, this ecosystem services. This framework, this concept includes the benefits people obtain from ecosystems. This provision, like timber, non-timber, agricultural goods, and so on, depending on the ecosystems, regulating like soil protection, water cycle protection, and so on. And interesting enough, there's this last part of cultural services, because ecosystems does not import only values in the material way. So it's let's say in global domestic products, but also non-material services, cultural and spiritual services, educational, and so on. So I think it's interesting to open the mind that that's not only about material things. Okay, the next shift was in 2018 when this science table advocated for opening the mind to nature contributions to people. So it's a broader concept. And recently there's this pushing for the concept framework of nature-based economy, recognizing that every activity, human activity and productive activity depends on the natural resources. So this is a next switch on understanding. Well, I like this graphic on the right side, placing the sustainable development goals in this kind, placing the biosphere with its planetary boundaries in the base, showing that human anthropic systems must fit into the boundaries placed by this biosphere, and that economy, as part of the anthropic activities, must fit both in the ecological and social sustainability. Because there's maybe as another biological principle we should take always into account, the sustainability. If a biological system or organism or species or population is spending more than the capacity of its habitat, normally there are only three ways out. One was migration, and I think today humankind has reached the limits, the planetary limits to do so. So, except some billionaire going to Mars, I think we are have closed this way. So only evolution or extinction persist. And evolution means to adapt and to improve to meet this capacity. And all this, and for this, this development goal is placed in the top. Partnership and collaboration and cooperation is paramount. This evolution in the last years also has triggered this initiative of the European Union for the European Green Deal and the biodiversity strategy, bioeconomy strategy updated and so on, around even the first ever EU forest strategy that tried to include these concepts in the European policy. One major player for forest-based bioeconomy is the EFI, the European Forest Institute. That is the umbrella institute for more than 100 organizations. One of them is my home institute, INIA-CSIC. But it has also a think tank, let's say. It's developing a lot of theoretical analysis and has a huge output of online publications about these topics. And one of them, already from 2017, is from Nontimber about forest-based bioeconomy. And we have this graphics here. That's another graphics for bioeconomy. And you see that natural capital is already placed in the base of it. And the destiny now is not markets or economy, but the human prosperity and well-being. I think it's interesting because when you talk about sustainability, you always say economic, ecological, and social. And here we see the ecosystem and the society, but we don't see economy everywhere, right? You say, okay, well, what's about market? What's about consumers? Actually, I think it's interesting to place ecosystems and society here because economy for itself is no entity. It's not the content of this graphics, but the container. All this is a bioeconomy. So it's not an entity by itself. It's not a goddess to be served for markets. It's just a frame. Okay, let's switch to the Mediterranean. That's the other part of this, the main part. The Mediterranean. The Mediterranean, this inner sea, is junction of three continents. Of course, it has been melting pot since antiquity and a great syncretism of cultures, melting into a fusion of cultural heritage and culinary traditions too. So Mediterranean lifestyle is also Mediterranean diets, cuisine Mediterranean. I think that's known by all of us. So this sense of place is a strong element in this. By the way, Mediterranean, due to this stepping stone place between Africa, Europe, and Asia, it's also a global biodiversity hotspot. But it's also the home of 500 million people. And they are strongly concentrated in coastal areas and in urban areas. And this means that after the rural abandonment in the last half century or 1 century in some places, there's been what we know as forest transition. That means that a strong increase of forest area due to afforestation, but mainly due to encroachment after abandonment, has led to a strong increase of forest area. Just example, Spain has increased in the last 50 years from 12 to 18 million hectares, so it's 50% increase, and more than doubles the forest biomass in this forests. It's very nice if you're looking for the carbon balance of your country, but it's not so nice if you're a firefighter or if you're living in some first area waiting for the next wildfire. Okay, of course, the Mediterranean area is also the European garden, so there's a very strong, intensive industrial horticultural activity, mainly in the coastal lowlands. And the Mediterranean is the main world's leading tourist destination, with more or less a third part of global tourism arriving here, at least before COVID, let's say. Urbanism, intensive agriculture and tourism are very water demanding activities. And of course, they are facing increasing water scarcity in the last years due to climate change. And the Mediterranean, you might note, have had a stronger temperature increase than global average, already 1.5 degrees in the last 50 years. And it's going worse, and rainfall is reducing, and extreme droughts are increasing, and so on. Okay, that's what we know. And that put also the first ecosystem at stake. I'm quoting here the main State of Mediterranean Forest from the FAO from 2013 and 18. And the first research agenda led by EFI is actually currently under development. So it's still open to comments. And if you visit the corresponding link, you can find this way to participate there. So the challenges are, if climate is changing, how can we maintain the functions, the ecosystem function like water protection, soil protection, biodiversity conservation, biodiversity not of primary ecosystems, but linked to this cultural landscapes after the human use. And how can we mitigate and adapt to this impact of climate changes? This is accelerated by the land use changes and also by the upcoming biotic risks, by introduced pest diseases and so on. Sometimes someone has talked about Africation of the Mediterranean climate, the gentrification of our countryside, and the underused forest that's accumulating biomass waiting for the next mega fire. So one challenge is how we can integrate the wildfire risk into the management of land uses and landscapes. Because let's be clear, that's not about forest management anymore, because farmland, agroforestry systems, forest systems are forming common landscapes, and the problems are not at the forest management unit or forest holding scale, but at landscape scale. So the solutions and the approaches must be upscaled to urban-rural interfaces. Just a very shocking example from California to Greece to Australia, how to tackle this, and it's not a question of foresters. So these challenges leads to the idea that what we need is innovation, but we need policy, economic, and institutional innovations. That means that the problems must be solved in an integrated land and use management. And this leads to the need of models and decision systems, and this multi-scale, multi-actor, and multi-objectives issues. And that was one learning process I have had in the last 2 years myself in research. You see, if research cannot rely only on ecosystems, or on one species, one ecosystem, one product, and so on, but must integrate these other issues, you can't research only in forestry, you must integrate these issues. And actually, when that Startree project started 9 years ago, I first thought I was invited there as forest expert, as for my knowledge on non-wood forest products, on some species and so on. Actually, when we started, I learned that I had to set up a regional case study, a stakeholder panel, to work with them, to interact with them. That was interesting. That it's not anymore just a researcher producing notes that is transferred and then delivered, researching for the sector. No, we had to start to research with the sector. So if there's no clients but partners in this research activities, and that's interesting learning when the problems are not clearly defined. Maybe no one wants your narrow-headed answers if the questions have changed. So you have to be open-minded in this. Okay, forest ecosystems. The Mediterranean forest ecosystems are mainly 120 more or less million hectares of forest and other woodlands, about 88 hectares of forest, depending on the definition of density and so on. And actually, in the last 20 years, has increased by nearly 10%. So land development and encroachment and afforestation. And the Mediterranean forest systems are complex and adaptive systems, and they're social and ecological systems. That means that they've been shaped and formed by millennia of human land uses and lately land underuses. The forests in the Mediterranean has feed both man and livestock. So it's not only grazing, browsing, because summer no grass is left for pasture, panache for the acorns, mainly acorns for pig feeding. But trees has given also humans staple food, like chestnut, acorns, or pine nuts. The two latter since, let's say, for the last 100,000 years, because already the last Neanderthals were feeding on acorns and pine nuts, we know. Okay, Mediterranean forest systems are multifunctional and multi-purpose, and the provision service is only one of many ecosystem services. And environmental economists always remember us that the non-provision services are worth 10 or 15 or whatever times the direct benefits the landowners get from. But speaking of landowners, if the stem grows is less than 1 cubic meter per hectare, or maybe 2, then it's not profitable. Even if you reach a rotation length and you cut the tree and they can sell them, if they're not burned before in a wildfire or lost in a drought or attacked by pests and so on. So it's timber production alone is not profitable, and often it's not timber but firewood. And there are several non-wood forest products, namely cork, pine nuts, or truffles, or chestnut. They are more profitable than this production. And then again, they are more frequently harvested. So it's not only to reach maybe 100-year rotation length to cut the trees, but you get them in cork every 9 years, or the fruits in every year. So that's interesting, especially for smallholders. Take into account that many regions has a mean private forest owners surface of maybe 1 or less hectares. So timber production is not feasible either. And most non-wood forest products are compatible with each other and with timber yield, but you must co-match them. You must put the management guidelines and you must optimize. So research is needed, but it's possible. And once again, I would like to strengthen that the nature contribution to people from Mediterranean non-wood forest products is not only material for livelihood, but it's strongly non-material. All these issues of cultural heritage, sense of place, spiritual, educational, recreational benefits, and so on, health and wellness. You see, when you go just now to the forest with your kids for harvest blueberries or pick mushrooms and so on, I'm sure you don't do this just for avoiding buying the jam in the supermarket, but for other reasons. So those reasons, of course, are not easily to monetize, to say, okay, the accounting system says it's how many dollars per hectare, but of course they are relevant. And I think we must learn to integrate this in our research. Just as example, in the Startree project, there was a survey of about 30,000 households in Europe, not only the Mediterranean, the whole Europe, and we found that 25% of the European households declare that they go to pick non-wood forest products several times a year. Maybe berries, maybe mushrooms, maybe nuts, but 25%. Okay, so it's a huge amount of people going out there. Most of them, of course, are non-commercial pickers. They are safe consumers, or maybe they are gifters, giving some jam or nuts to some friends or families. maybe local interchanging products, and some of them are informal sellers, so they sell but without billing. And when you analyze one value chain or one sector, you always find that the non-formally traded amount exceeds nearly always the commercial statistics. Maybe one exception is Portugal, where cork, of course, is optional traded. So Portugal is clearly seen as one case where it's exceed. But for example, in Spain, it's supposed to be 40% of the value of traded non-wood forest products compared with roundwood. But if you take into account that the roundwood in Spain and 70% is from Atlantic Spain, the northern Spain, the non-Mediterranean Spain, and send it in 3 species, that is Pinus radiata, exotic, Eucalyptus, exotic, and the native Pinus pinaster. You know that the Mediterranean timber is less than 30%, the rest 30%. So the non-wood forest product, the traded non-wood forest product of Spain is exceeding the amount of roundwoods too. Okay, the last 10 years, we have had 3 European projects, 3 non-wood forest products. The Coast Action FP 1203, that is that has it is one outcome of this book on non-wood forest products in Europe. That's linked here. The START 3 project at the same time with a lot of deliverables and reports on the webpage, and you can find also this book there, these outcomes. And lately, the thematic network, incredible on Mediterranean non-wood forest products and innovation there. A lot of deliverables too in the webpage and results. We've built up a knowledge repository with practical abstracts, with more than 250 fact sheets on different aspects of NWFP. And we have published also 5 roadmaps on cork, nuts, berries, mushroom truffles, and aromatics and medicinal plants. And one outcome of this project is this white paper on lessons learned on non-wood forest products in Europe that you can find in the link too. Some generates non-wood forest products should be mentioned, of course: cork, Mediterranean pine nuts, sweet chestnut, mushroom truffles, pine resin, or medicinal plants. These 5 groups have had in the incredible project innovation networks, so you can find the link with the resources about each of them in the link there. In chestnut, you have also the European Castagna network with very nice information. And there are, of course, other products like argan oil or pine honey, not really incredible, but they should be mentioned. All this number, I should mention, the presentation will be placed online in the Forest History Society in the UFRO webpage, so you can have a closer look to the links afterwards. Okay, in all the value chains we studied, we found that innovation is needed for sustaining the production. That some products are still coming into fashion, some are stable, and some of them have been declined in the last decades for several reasons. Might be for change of uses, and it might be also due to climate global change or pest and diseases like chestnuts due to ink disease and other. One solution in the profitable ones is domestication. And domestication, fine enough, means that you're going from forest systems to agroforestry systems or even agricultural systems. So it's in use now in cork and in pine nuts and in chestnuts forever. It's been cultivated for millennia, even truffling in the oak plantations. And one sad example maybe is a blueberry industry that has been built up in southern Spain in an industrial way. non-sustainable way, using illegal groundwater extraction, agrochemicals, and so on. So there might be bad examples too. Okay, anyway, you can make these graphics for some of the products, but for most numbers products, you can't do this because you do not have the real numbers. If the markets are informal, then you don't know what you're talking about. The same before, you don't have to research only about the biological products, growth and yield models, climate impacts, cofactors, and so on, but you must think also on the whole value chain. Collection is not only technical, but also access rights, the relation of harvested amounts, and so on, sustainability, the processing, the industry you are collecting for, the EU type of the products you're producing. Trade is a very relevant factor for all stakeholders consulted, because good part of non-wood forest products are still informal markets because they are traditional users, not always commercial users. But when they start to be profitable, often this informal local use start to become in black market, and actually there are millions in international trafficking and untraced trade between countries and continents. So what we need is integration of multiple products, services, and experiences. Experience of non-wood forest products, for example, microtourism. To go to the forest can be a touristic activity if you sell it to the consumers. You must integrate the value chain, so it's about product and identity. So a little bit like olive oil at high-end wines. Don't sell just in bulk. Do it a nice, traceable labeling, and build up regional brands and quality brands to show what you're up. Don't sell black truffle just as a mushroom. So this is black truffle. So there are several issues that has been named there. Of course, innovation and new technologies can help here. For example, for traceability, you can use mobile phone apps and so on. And all these issues are discussed widely in the white paper I've mentioned before. And this white paper has been backed up in a workshop with the U4 task force in last September, with participants from 14 countries. And in March, in the policy forum organized in collaboration with EFI, with participants from 33 countries. So actually, I think that's a nice piece of work to be taken into account. Actually, it has been taken into account by the European Commission when building up the Europe's first strategy. So that's all. So I think I've mentioned a lot of things and not finished none of them, so there might be a place for discussion. Thank you. And thank also for the organizers of the webinar series.
Very good.
Okay.
Good job, Sven. Very thorough. I really appreciate how you set the stage for understanding the bioeconomy and the situation in the Mediterranean. Do we have some questions? I see some questions up there. Let me take a look at. Here's one from Harold Bassick. He says, thanks for the great talk. Do you think that a co-production of timber and non-wood forest products is possible in all ecoregions globally, or are there some differences depending on socioeconomic and ecological context? For example, like in the Mediterranean forest ecosystems.
Well, of course, co-production can be possible often. Co-production with timber or co-production between different products. You may do pine nuts and mushrooms, for example, perfectly, or maybe grazing and other uses. It depends on the local context, and I think we should start not to think only in the forest holding scale co-production, but on the forest landscape co-production. Just an example, if you put a chestnut or a pine nut plantation, agronomic plantation, that is tilled without vegetation, without underground vegetation, and you make it strip-like in strategic places, it might be a cultivated fire break. So it might strengthen the sustainability and stability of the forest behind. So just now in northern Portugal, we have a huge expansion of eucalyptus and northern Spain, and this continuous plantation because you have half an hectare, your neighbor has half an hectare, and then suddenly you have 1,000 hectares of continuous eucalyptus. If you make a landscape planning and make a diverse landscape, then it might be really more profitable, more stable, and less risk.
Great. Here's one that came in earlier. It said, what is meant by Africanization of climate?
Well, that's maybe kind of a joke. When you are today in Spain in summer, you might think you're in the Sahel. That is, the climate's become drier and hotter than it used to be. And this is a sustained trend in the last 20 years. So that's related with the place where the jet stream come to Europe and so on. And maybe this year is not the worst year in the Western Mediterranean, at least, where we get wetter summers than usual. But in the average, our climate is coming drier, and it is not actually Sahara going north. So there are no dunes of sand moving in Spain yet, but it's more tropical climate coming.
Next question: what role could the European Union and other international bodies play in addressing the different challenges like climate change you discussed? So what role does EU and other big international bodies have in this?
Well, of course, the biggest international body is the United Nations. And the United Nations had to take roles there with sustainable development goals that integrate all this in the agenda, in 2030 agenda, and each organism and European Union and each member state, of course, each of us should push for transitioning to this and fulfilling of the objectives of this agenda and the sustainable development goals. So the program is quite marked forward, and so EU has at least on the paper proclaimed a lot of proposals. Let's see if they put it in place in the next years, because or you put in the next years or you will go nowhere anywhere. So active policy and coordinating and cooperating and international cooperating not only within the EU but with the global south too, and so on. So I really think that the frame is the UN.
Very good. Here's one from Charles McClure. He asked, what effects are major fires having on long-term planning?
Yes, you ask. Of course, they must be tackled. So if you have a continuous landscapes, maybe of abandoned coppice forests, of old oak growth that have been abandoned, or of recent eucalyptus afforestation, then you can't do anything against fires in this landscape. You must change the landscape. So it's not a problem of the forest owners that want to make livelihood of his forest, but of upper scale. So if the mega fires persist, let's go elsewhere. I mean, it's about Lake Tahoe just now, right?
The next question we have, do you think the differences in protein content of various pine nut species may be the result of very long management of Pinus pinea?
Well, maybe I shouldn't respond to this, because if I start to talk about Pinus pinea, I will not end ever. But it might be the hypothesis of Pinus pinea is that it possibly came out by human dispersion only in the Holocene after a very strong bottleneck in very few sites in southern Iberian Peninsula. So it might be, but I don't think it has been selected for, but like me by just a by effect.
Good. The next question, How can we take into account or deal with informality within innovation process, resource management, and economical enhancement? So how do we deal with that informality that we all know about?
Well, you know, I think there are 3 points. First of all, often it is not illegal, but let's say illegal or pre-legal. It's pre-economic. I mean, all of us or your parents or your husband, your grandparents have been going to the forest of your village, sampling and harvesting and so on. So it has been a traditional use and not an economic activity with a sense at the formal market and so on. So that must be recognized that economy, formal economy, it's not all. So if I collect mushrooms, I pay no VAT. And the VAT is the added values is not recognized. It's not in the national accounting system. That's the first part. The national accounting system is not the world. It's the model of the world, and there's something that lacks. Second, there are these spiritual cultural values that are important and that are not recognized. You can try to do environmental economy and express them in dollars or in euros, but I think it's not the smartest way to tackle this question. And third of all, informal markets is one thing and illegal markets another. If you, for example, have a license to harvest cones or truffles from a forest, you as owners and want to harvest truffles, and someone steals the truffles before, then you will get tens of thousands of euros or dollars of damage, of economic damage, and who has stolen this products is a criminal. And then again, who buys this loot afterwards? So the industry that is buying illegal, harvested or stolen products, it's black markets, it's trafficking. And third of all, it's not only about the legality of declaration, but also of the identity. If you sell a tuber indica from China as a European trader, just as truffle, and confirm to consumers as if it were a black truffle. I mean, tuber indica may be $25 a kilo and black truffle 500. So the quality is quite different. If you confound the consumers, you should be accountable for this too. So authorities should look for a sound traceability and labeling system.
Very good. Next question. How to ensure that domestication processes do not undermine genetic diversity of these products?
Yep. If you start from scratch from wild population, it might be not that problem. If you go to a domestication in an agricultural agroforestry approach, maybe either because then you don't substitute the original populations. But if you're operating in the original place, of course, you might be aware of this. And then again, if you start to introduce foreign varieties or species or specimens, that means long distance replacement, nearly always you will get introduction of pests, diseases, and so on. Some you have, let's say, the Xylella fastidiosa olive bacterium or some disease, some blight there, and then I mean, you know what happened with chestnut in North America, right? With disease and it's a blight, and this is a risk. I think it's not so much the genetic degradation, but the biotic risks by translocation.
The next question comes from the Republic of Georgia, where forests cover almost 40% of the country's territory with a vast number of non-timber forest products. Unfortunately, they don't have relevant and modern methodologies for resource quantification of non-timber forest products. And the gentleman's interested, which methodologies do you use to quantify resources in Spain and across the Mediterranean? So what methodologies, could you talk about the methods a bit?
Of course, inventory. Inventory might be biological inventory, so going back the same as you do with your allium in America, or we did with pine nuts. Go back every year intake numbers, and faster way might be by in the place surveys of the collectors. So you can both get the biological production and so dependent on weather and so on, and the commercial production by surveys. And but field work is necessary. Then again, you can try to get a contact with the industry to see what's processed, but then you will find within Europe there's a strong movement, maybe not to Ukraine or Georgia or Romania, but from. So a lot of the carpet mushrooms, for example, dried carpet that you find processed in Spain, come from Romania, for example. So this you need to take on the origin. So inventory. So it's a many years of research, I'm afraid.
The next questions also deal with methodological approaches and what can be done. And I'm going to skip those because we're running low on time right now. But I think the basic message about methodology is inventory and inventory and inventory, both biologically, but also what's coming through the markets and through industry. Let me move forward. In academic society, and this is coming from our colleague in China, there's a big debate on property rights of forest products and services. Forests may be owned by a particular person or a family, but very fragmented. If managed by individuals or a community, then forest products and services may be declined. Any experiences from your research on how to deal with these kind of issues? The fragmentation, and how do you get the economies of scale?
Yeah. Of course, fragmentation is a problem, and the best way to tackle this is grouping, common management. That might be a forest association, that might be cooperatives, and so on. I'm aware that in the Eastern world, common bigger holdings are quite out of fashion, but there may be private common holdings, so cooperatives or associations in the trade, not necessarily in the management. Then again, if you take into account that a lot of forest has been state forests or common forests owned by villages or by entities that had been privatized only in the last years, maybe there must be a rethinking of this. So the property is okay, but the way to manage has a strong, this externalities, this non-provisioning existing services that should not be private profits, but kind of common heritage. And so the management should include this. But in the practical point of view, the easiest way to overcome this, make local associations or cooperatives to work together.
We have a time for about one or two more questions. The question comes from China. Camellia, I may have mispronounced it, camellia oil is the focus of this gentleman's research. Does that belong to an NTFP?
Well, you can say it depends. If you use if I wrote a definition, any good produced of except timber produced by forest, trees out of forest and other woodlands, then of course, if it's from a tree, you can see it's an NTFP. Even an apple would be. Apple is a, so I would add to this definition, except if it's cultivated, agricultural cultivation. So if the camellia is cultivated, you might say it's agricultural product, and if it's wild harvested, you can think it's a wild product. Yes, but it depends on the definition.
We've got a question here from Sven Walter. Great presentation. The question is, circular bioeconomy often refers to 3 R's of reducing minimum use of raw materials, reusing, maximum reuse of products, and recycling, high quality reuse of raw materials. How do you think we can use these principles to better position NTFP in ongoing bioeconomy initiatives?
Okay, reducing is a question of efficiency, and this is, of course, a biological principle. So bioeconomy should look for this, to be efficient and reduce. Reduce, it's maybe just to say less and less and less. Okay, we must reduce fossil resources, of course, because they are ending, and we must reduce this. We must optimize the use of biological ones. Reusing, of course, if it's circular and biological resource should be circular, that's easy to do. And recycling, this is cascade principle, that we shouldn't use high quality timber for burning just because there's a subsidy to do so, but we should look for a optimize and a cascade principle to do so. I think the 3R came from waste avoiding, to avoid waste and so on. But actually in biological systems, there are very few wastes at all. But a waste is always a raw material for another organism for the next step. So really, it shouldn't be avoiding waste by the 3R, but really change the frame.
I think we've got one quick short question I want to get in here, and then we're going to have to call it a day because I don't want to take up too much time of everyone. Any comments on how scientists can better inform, educate politicians, policymakers, and regulators on the bioeconomy, especially if they're not interested in making changes?
Well, first of all, wrong question, because we are not here to better inform and educate politicians. We are not working for them, but we must start to work with them, with politicians, with forest managers, for local or regional or state or federal, whatever politicians, but also with stakeholders. Normally, you are in your ivory tower, and no one is interested in what you publish, even if it's a Nature. If it's Nature, maybe you make it to the newspaper front page, but it's not really relevant. You should start to work not only forward with the stakeholders, with the sector, and together, and with this lobbying, with this existing lobbying, you will come into policy. For example, this white book we published, this white paper, has been done with a huge involvement of more than 1,000 stakeholders of the sectors. So it's not only us, it's the Forest Owners Association, industry, and so on.
Well, I apologize for cutting us off on the questions. There are several more up here, but we are running low on time. So I'm going to cut the questions off and provide some closing remarks. I just want to thank you very much, Sven, for the informative and very exciting presentation. It really brings it all together and makes sense of it.